Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us. So we are winding down to kind of an epilogue, talking about this book and what it has meant to you. And I noticed if I could refer back to the beginning of the book. If you do have the book, you can turn back to, it says, it's called A Legacy of Life. And I'd like you to talk about this letter. You talk about a letter from your dad. Could you talk about this a little bit with us?
I'll explain it as I read the letter, and I'm going to read it rather than just talk about it, which is different from our other conversations. And I will want you to feel free to interject or have a comment or ask a question as we go along to make it more clear and alive. But the essence of the article is that I was building on a very short one-page letter that I received from my dad, which the article itself talks about, and wanted to include it in the book, not as a typical chapter in the book that had come from my work with my clients over the years that had begun as articles that eventually turned into the book, but it's a separate document that I had written and shared with many of my clients and family members and friends that they found helpful. And my book, I've later came to feel was an expansion of, an application of three short pieces of advice that my dad gave me, just I think inadvertently and unknowingly in this short letter. And so I wanted to include it as sort of an introduction to the book in its written form, and base the book on a practical application of what those three phrases came to mean to me over the years.
And we're choosing to do it at the end because it does seem to stand alone, but it seems to make, in this case, in the podcast, such a great reflection after we've learned so much and why you have dedicated your life to helping people live better.
Thank you. And so with the readers' and the listeners' permission, I'd like to read it, and then we'll comment on it as we go along as needed. But I'd like for it to be just a good wrap up and conclusion to what we've already talked about in our previous table talks.
Okay.
A legacy of life. The door to the classroom opened just a bit, and the secretary softly asked me to join her in the hall. She had just received a message for me that Dad had suffered a heart attack and was in critical condition. By the time my wife Karen and I arrived at the hospital, we had only a short time to see him. He was unconscious and did not know we were there. In a few moments, he was gone. Following the funeral, the family began the painful but necessary task of getting his business in order. While going through Dad's desk at work, I found a letter in the top drawer. It was addressed to Karen and me. It was sealed, stamped, and ready to mail. I was actually a little surprised, for Dad was not a writer of letters. Though we had kept in touch through phone calls and visits, he had rarely written me. I took the letter aside and opened it. It was but one page, written hastily it seemed. A chatty letter about his week. You already know about me being out a few days, but tomorrow is a new week and I will be blowing and a-going again. Just a little flurry with my chest, but my heart is okay. A little further down. My, what a beautiful day. I have some hogs now. It's a break from the station to run out and feed them. The goobers, that's West Texas for peanuts, are about all threshed. See you soon. Study a little, work some, and live a lot. Love, Dad. My father's letter meant a great deal to me as the months and years went by. I had realized that it was probably the last thing he wrote before his death. That it was a personal note to Karen and me, which in itself made it special, and that it was the only piece of his writing I owned. It was not until a few years later, however, that its impact on my life really began to take shape in my mind. Dad was a working man, the product of a generation that had seen 2 world wars and a devastating economic depression. He, like so many other millions of husbands and fathers, often found life a day-to-day struggle just to get by. He had not amassed any kind of fortune, had not built a great reputation, though he was highly respected in our community as a fine, honest, and genuinely Christian man, nor had the time and energy to be the kind of father to me that I feel he had really wanted to be. Thus, I had thought that Dad had not been able to leave me much, but some special memories and a few personal mementos. Years passed. I had finished my education, established my own home, and experienced much more of what life is about in my profession as teacher and therapist. Then one day, as I was browsing through some papers, I came across Dad's letter. I glanced over it casually, as I had done on previous occasions, but then began to read it more carefully, with renewed interest. I remembered that Dad had rarely written, that he had never spoken to me of his physical problems before that letter, and that both had occurred the day before his death. It began to seem more and more as if he were taking this moment out of his day to tell me something. It was then that I noticed the last words to me. Study a little, work some, and live a lot. Love, Dad. As I read these words over and over, I became at first confused, but then, with continued reflection, very excited. I was confused because it did not sound like what I thought he would have said, nor what he had been able to do in his own life. I became excited because in hindsight and with more experience, I was beginning to understand that my father had given me much more than I had previously thought. He had left me no money, no business to inherit, no worldly reputation of success to coattail through life on. But in a few short words, with a wisdom beyond most, my father had given me a legacy of life. Study a little. At first, I simply could not understand how my dad could say that I should study only a little. He had not had the opportunity for advanced education, and he realized how it had limited his own life. He highly respected education and wanted it for all his children. But in retrospect, I began to understand what I believe my father meant by his first word of advice to me. I have watched many people with seemingly good intention become, quote, professional students. They're always studying, reading, planning, going to school, doing research, but they lack the courage and commitment to go out in the world and put into practice what they've learned. I'm confident Dad was saying to me, son, get a good education as much as you want. Learn as much about your world as you can. But do not hole up in the classroom or the office or your home, always inventing a better mousetrap. Sooner or later, you have to get out and sell mousetraps. Don't hide in intellectual pursuits to avoid living life to its fullest. Work some. This too I did not understand at first. My most vivid memory of my father had always been that of a worker. He had worked hard all of his life trying to make ends meet. He did not have much time to play with me, go camping or fishing with me, or even take time out for himself. He had no hobbies, little recreation, and little time for days off or vacations. To work some was just not my father. Now, I am totally convinced that Dad was very simply and profoundly trying to tell me, son, please do not use my work life as a model for your own. I have worked hard because I had to, not because I have wanted to. Your life can be different. You live in a different day with many more opportunities for a good life without constant labor. Take advantage of your generation. Don't follow in my footsteps, work-wise, just because, quote, Dad did it. Do not make work your life. Do not become a workaholic who lives to work, but become someone who works to live. Make a good living, but take the long look. You'll be a better worker if you do not allow yourself to burn out. Learn to work smarter instead of harder. Realize that work is not the essence of life. Instead, know that the quality of your life gives essence to your work. Live a lot. I strongly believe that my father had wanted to live a lot. He, along with most of his generation, however, had been dealt some of life's harshest blows. A childhood on struggling farms, limited opportunity for formal schooling, a world engulfed in two major holocausts, a horrible time of drought, the great shock, the stock market crash, and subsequent hard times for most everyone, and the constant struggle to recover from it all. It would seem almost a travesty for one who had, quote, lived so little to have to pass on the wish for the good life to his children without ever tasting for himself the fruits of his labors. I began to understand a little of how Joshua of the Old Testament must have felt when he, not Moses, was given the privilege of entering the promised land. But that is indeed what my father wanted for all of his children, a better life than he had, with no feelings of guilt to mar its joy. I cannot say for sure how much my father knew about what it means to live a lot. I have an idea he knew more than I'd given him credit for knowing. I'm sure, however, that he did not see living a lot as just living it up, although he was always for having a good time whenever possible. Nor did it mean simply wealth and possessions, though here again, he did not preach the virtues of poverty by any means. I believe I have some clearer concepts today of what Dad would have shared with me if he had the words and opportunity. So, with respect to him and his practical wisdom, here is what I believe he meant me to learn when he urged me to live a lot. To live means to think. To think of yourself, for yourself, to question the rules before you blindly obey or disobey them. Recognize the conflicting value systems within yourself. Analyze them and reconcile them into a unified system that is right for you. To live means to appreciate and develop those teachings from your past that have survived the tests of time and reality. At the same time, respect yourself enough to eliminate those which have been proven untrue and unworkable. It means to value the counsel of those who love you and have wisdom to share, but to accept the personal responsibility for your own ultimate decisions. To live means to feel. It means to become aware of yourself, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. You must not run from your pain, but value it as the teacher and protector it is. You must feel your joys and pleasures so that you may have reason to live. You must feel the agony of defeat before you can know the thrill of victory. Only when you feel your frustrations can you know that you're reaching for a goal. It is only by feeling your grief fully that you can know what you have loved and wanted. Your anger can be constructive only when you feel it clearly and express it appropriately to solve problems, not to attack others. You grow and achieve only when you face your fears head on and conquer them. It is only by feeling realistic guilt that you can recognize your mistakes, forgive yourself, and correct your behavior. It is only by allowing yourself to take the ultimate risk of loving physically and emotionally that you can begin to understand what living and God are all about. To live means to do. It requires you to carry out your thoughts, beliefs, and feelings in daily, congruent, and constructive behavior. It means saying, I will, and then doing what you say. It means an endless variety of new adventures, seeing, touching, running, crying, laughing, tasting, working, learning, buying, playing, and doing each with new understanding and zest. To do means to act, not react. To be a creator as well as a creature. Study a little, to be sure. Work some, of course. Live a lot in absolute necessity. To live a lot means to give yourself permission to think, to feel, and to do what is right with you within the wisdom of the one who created you to do all three. In the brevity forced by time run out, man's true spirit seems to emerge. Thanks, Dad, for taking the time to write.
You invited me to interject or ask questions, but I have none. And I think after listening to all the podcast and this final reflection, I think you've given us so much to learn how to live a lot. And I think that's why we're on this planet. I don't think we're on this planet to work constantly, study constantly, although we all do that a lot, most of us. But I hope that this book will help people learn how to live a more effective and well life, healthy life. And you have so much information to share, and I'm so fortunate and honored to have been able to walk this journey with you in these conversations at the kitchen table.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribd, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris.